Hello and welcome back to the show. So today I'm super excited to be sitting down here with my guest, David Kitchen. David is a former Division One collegiate coach, strength and conditioning coach, and he is now the founder of Edge Leadership Academy, which is one of the top leadership development companies that is out there, consulting with many different college teams, many different sports teams, and also companies out there as well. And today, what we're going to be talking about and getting David's opinion on is how to become a leader yourself and how to develop other leaders in your organization or team as well, which is super important for the survival of our business, our organization, whatever it is that you're building. So without further ado, David, welcome to the show, man.
What's going on, brother? I'm excited to be here, man. It's for the people that don't know, it's Finish Friday that we're recording this. I'm a huge Friday guy, so you're getting the juice today, man. I'm jacked up.
Awesome, man. I'm excited. I love your energy. And without, going into any details as far as the content goes first, would you mind just kind of introducing yourself a little bit? How did you get into it? What was it that kind of drove you to, well, first of all, become a coach and such a great coach, but also how did that lead you to become, the founder of a leadership consulting company?
Yeah, man. So I'll kind of give you the Reader's Digest version, then we can unwrap as you'd like to. So as you said, my name is David Kitchen. Nobody has called me David probably since I'm about 11, other than my mother. So everybody calls me Kitch or Coach Kitch. Either one is completely fine, but I joke about it and say the only time I hear my full name is when I'm in trouble. So, but yeah, as you said, I'm the founder and president of Edge Leadership Academy. But prior to that, I spent 10 years as a college strength and conditioning coach. And I was fortunate, to raise up through the ranks and rise up and have a really awesome career and get some really great opportunities at some great institutions with some great coaches and great people. But going back before that, I tell people all the time the greatest gift I was ever given is that I was born to a single mother. And so I was raised in a single parent household. And so I think that's where the earliest seeds of leadership were kind of planted for me. Was the fact that I was trying to be a leader at a young age, being the man of the house at 10, 11 years old. Um, and then also seeing a strong female role model in the house. So I think that's kind of where the early leadership seeds were planted because as I went through my early days in high school into college, the only male role models I had in my life that I saw from a leadership standpoint were my coaches, right? And so I was fortunate to be a good player in high school on a great team. So shout out to my teammates for letting me ride the coattails on that one. And it gave me an opportunity to go to college, gave me an opportunity to go to Susquehanna University, play football there. And unfortunately, I was medically disqualified and ended up blowing my knee a couple times and, lost football. But basically, what happened and what set this trajectory really kind of into high speed was I left school and everybody was telling me, hey, you got to let athletics go. Like, you're no longer a football player, you're no longer an athlete. Get a real job, basically, is what I was hearing, right? And so I did. I got into IT sales and I was selling cloud solutions to medium sized businesses all across Pennsylvania. And I was successful at it. I enjoyed it. Let me rephrase, I enjoyed the money. I didn't enjoy the job. And I remember being at a Christmas party and we were in there. Everybody's getting their annual bonuses. It's a happy time, right? Guys are wearing their nice watches. They flexing a little bit. Everybody's dressed up and having a good time. And I remember thinking to myself, this isn't what I want. Like, that's not success to me. And I had been coaching high school football on the side just as kind of like something to do. And I realized in that moment, like, this is what I want to do. I want to be a coach. So flash forward a couple weeks, a couple months, I ended up quitting my job. And I had actually sent out letters to every Division One school on the East Coast and said, I'll come work for you for free if you give me an opportunity. And so I was fortunate enough that one school reached back out and said, hey, if you want to quit your job and come out here, we'll pay you nothing, so come on out. And so that's what I did. I quit my job. I emptied my savings account and packed everything I had into my Jeep and drove to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, lived in a one-bedroom apartment. And literally it was the kind of place where they only take cash for rent. So you can kind of assume from there what kind of place I was living in. And I had a business degree, so there was no guarantee that I would even pass the certifications to become a strength and conditioning coach. I had no background in anatomy and physiology or any of the things that were required. And so I studied for months and stayed there and worked for free. And then from there, my career kind of took off, man. I had the opportunity to go to a smaller school, Division 1 school or Division 2 school, excuse me, called Bloomsburg University. And from there, I became the youngest head strength coach in the country. So at 24 years old, 2 years out of college, I became, the youngest head strength coach in all of college athletics. And that was really the springboard. So from there, I went to UNLV, had some time at Georgia Southern University, and then returned back to my alma mater, Susquehanna University, to wrap up my career. And it was a great time for me. I learned a lot of lessons. But what led to the leadership piece was the fact that throughout my time in college athletics, I kept hearing the same thing. I kept hearing coaches, administrators, other players, pro scouts, everybody was saying, we need more leaders. We want more people to step up and be in leadership roles, right? And so I had built leadership curriculums. I had done leadership development with our teams. I had done leadership councils, internship programs, all types of different kind of leadership style things. And then all of a sudden, I was having a conversation with a young man who, in my opinion, was the best leader that I had ever coached. And he said, Coach, I've been the best player on every team I've ever been on. And everybody's always telling me to lead, but nobody ever taught me how. And that was like, every entrepreneur has that boom moment, right? That was it for me, where I was like, oh, there's a business here, right? And so what I did was our contracts were up at the end of that season, and the pandemic had just hit. And so at Division 1, when a coach leaves, you're attached to that coach, right? So if the head coach leaves, you get fired too, or you can stay and try and interview for your job. And so I stayed and I said, I'm going to interview for my job. I did the interview, but meanwhile, in the background, I was kind of starting to plan like what a business would look like. And the moment came where I got the opportunity to sign my contract extension and stay on. And I thought, this isn't it, man. It's the same feeling I had at that Christmas party. I was like, no, it's time for me to do something different. And so, middle of the pandemic, I walked away from a Division 1 coaching contract and started my business, man. And we've been in business now for 3 years. We've gone from, 0 clients to well over, we've worked with over 100 different companies and schools and teams. And so it's been this wild ride that has really grown from being just like social media content and free engagement and how every business kind of starts. And then all of a sudden we have, within 8 months or 7 months, we had 35 NCAA programs that we were working with. And then all of a sudden we started to get businesses. And then we launched a corporate division to our company where we have a director of corporate training. And then we launched a podcast, and it just became this fully formed actual business, right? And it's been a great ride, man. It's been so fun, and I'm just so fortunate to have had the opportunities and to cross paths and be a part of the journey that I've been a part of.
That's awesome, man. I think, that story of you becoming and realizing that these are not the things that you want to be doing for the rest of your life, and then that leading to a business is what a lot of people experience, right? It doesn't have to be starting a business, but as far as just your path in life. So as far as being a very successful coach and now being very successful on the coaching, leadership, and consulting side, what would you say are some things that I guess you could take over from the world of athletics and sports that you're applying now in your philosophies in coaching corporate and other business owners?
Yeah, there's so many similarities. There's so many similarities that cross over, and I think that's why when you look at even as high up as macro as like public speaking, or some of the motivational speakers that come in, like so many of them have sports backgrounds or military backgrounds because there's just so many lessons that carry over. For me personally, when I look at from the business side, my business is a reflection of who I was as a coach, right? And so from a purely organizational standpoint and purely vision, mission, value driven company, that's who we are. We're a reflection of who I was as a coach, meaning that our mission is to arm as many people as possible with the skills that it takes to be a leader in their community, in their business, and in life, right? And our vision is very simple. We want to be the driving force behind people's success. That's it. We want to see people grow, execute, and learn together, and that's what we're about. As far as actual tactical things that I bring over, um, a lot of our leadership lessons were forged in athletics, right? And so what I mean by that is I kind of come at it differently because most people go to school and get the education or the certifications, and then they try and go teach the stuff, right? And I think that's a disconnect that we see a lot in higher education, especially if you look at like business courses and things like that. Like you got professors, and it's not a knock on higher ed. It's just you have professors that are teaching you entrepreneurship that have never started a business, and it's like there's a disconnect between the theory and the execution, right? Versus for me, I was coming from somewhere where I had executed for 10 years and now I'm adding the education on top of it, right? So that's where I kind of come from. So what we bring over from a similarity standpoint is understanding the pathway to success, right? So what I might mean by that is we start at the top and we look at leadership, and we know that leadership sets the culture, right? Leadership tells everything below it in the organization what's accepted, what's rewarded, what's tolerated, what's celebrated, etc. Your culture is going to be a reflection of that. Your culture is just going to reinforce that message, right? So we go leadership to culture. From culture, we start to focus on habits because your habits are where that culture is going to show up on a daily basis inside your organization, whether those are internal facing conversation or client facing interactions. Either way, it's going to show up. And your daily behaviors compounded over time, that's what gives you the last piece of the formula, which is the results, right? So leadership, culture, habits, results. That's very much so an athletic formula, right? If we look at it from a team standpoint, we look to our leaders first. Our leaders set our culture. Our culture dictates how we practice, how we prepare, how we train, right? And then ultimately, how we do those things is what happens on Saturday when the clock's on and then the lights are on, right? So it's the same concept, just portrayed through a corporate lens. And so that's really where the biggest carryover is, but all of the skills that we learn are the same, and whether it's communication skills, consistency skills, character, creativity, any of those things are present in both sides, right? Because if you think about leadership, let's just use this simple example. When we talk about leadership, we say a Super Bowl winning quarterback, right? Nobody says a Super Bowl winning quarterback managed his team to a Super Bowl win, right? They say he led them to the Super Bowl win. Nobody says that a Fortune 500 CEO managed his organization out of crisis. They say he led them out of crisis, right? And so there's similarities across the board. For me, I think I overestimated how difficult the transition would be.
That's pretty interesting, right? Because you do see a lot of these like successful athletes and coaches, and you mentioned the other side of it is military background, come and be very successful and apply the same principles as far as becoming great leaders and also just great at their craft. And that's another, I think, a good question to kind of discuss a little bit here, especially get your opinion on, which is, I mean, I'm sure you've seen it many, many times in the athletic arena, which is you're going to have great players or people who are very skilled at one set of skills or maybe in a whole set of skills, but they're not great leaders, right? So what is the disconnect there between somebody who's doing really well and what they're doing by themselves, but taking that extra step and actually being responsible for a group of people and their success?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that leadership is a skill. Just like sales is a skill, just like IT or coding is a skill, it's a skill. And so a lot of times the natural progression in the corporate world is so and so, Joe was the highest performing salesman for 6 quarters in a row. So now Joe's going to get promoted to sales manager. Well, those are completely different roles with completely different expectations. And so a lot of times what we see is we see a high performing individual who continues to show up as an individual in a role that requires them to let their individual side die, right? Because the higher you go on the organizational chart, the less it's about you, the more it becomes about everybody around you. And so the number one thing that we try and teach our managers and our C-suite and everybody that we work with is that you want to identify people that understand that leadership is a choice, right? Leadership is a choice. And so how do you start to really identify that? And that's where that disconnect is that we were talking about. The talent doesn't equal leadership. To me, it's a mindset, right? And so the example that I like to use is the bricklayer story, right? So if I walk up to 3 bricklayers and I say to the first one, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm cutting bricks." It's a valid story. Thank you for your answer, right? You move on to number 2. "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm building a wall." Valid answer, right? You move on to number 3 and you say, "Well, what are you doing?" and he says, I'm building one of the most beautiful cathedrals in the world, so everybody has a place to come and praise, or do whatever they want to do here, right? Which one of those three is a leadership perspective? It's obviously number three, because they're focused on the process, right? So if we're trying to identify leaders in our groups and in our organizations, we want to look for people that have that mindset and have that process driven mindset. They're like farmers, right? They understand that every day there's work to be done. They don't get to see the beautiful fruit baskets and the produce displays in the store. They don't care about that. They care about the process, right? And so that's really important to understand. And the other piece is just knowing that leadership, like I said, is a choice. It's also something that you have to actively choose on a daily basis. So just because you choose it once, right, doesn't make you a leader all the time. Just like going to the gym once doesn't make you strong. And so, in my opinion, there's plenty of qualified people out there who have no desire to lead, and that's fine. It's not for everybody, right? No matter how many titles you give that person, you can't force them to lead. And in fact, when you start to do that, which is something we do a lot in corporate America, we force these people into leadership roles. If we do that, it can be toxic for your workforce. It can be toxic for your culture, because those who do want to lead and don't have that can interpret that as a reflection of your lack of insight into the team, right? So you promoted this person because you don't know what's going on, right? When really all you were doing was looking at KPIs. You were looking at sales performance, data metrics, whatever your measurables are, right? This causes resentment, internal conflict, all these different things. And so, to me, again, you have to look for people that accept those hard truths about leadership, and that are actively ready to step into that role, right? Whether that hard truth is the fact that leadership can be lonely, which it is, right? It could be the hard truth that you're not going to have it all figured out. It could be the hard truth that it's a 24/7 job. You don't get to pick and choose when you lead. It could be the hard truth that it's not about you. That's a tough one, because as high performers, which is ultimately like what you're talking about there, those talented athletes or whatever, we're used to scoring the touchdowns. We're used to getting the accolades and being in the newspaper and all these things. The best leaders take no responsibility for the wins, but they take all the responsibility for the losses. That's a complete 180 in mindset, right? And so those are some of the things that we have to look for when we're trying to identify those people, so that we don't get stuck in that talent equals leadership mindset, which I think handicaps a lot of teams and a lot of organizations.
It absolutely does. I believe so as well. And I love that you said that leadership is a choice, because it is. And I think for a lot of people, when they're forced into a position of leadership, it makes them very uncomfortable, and it makes, it kind of destroys the entire concept of true leadership, which is it is a voluntary thing that you want to step up and take responsibility for the team and their successes, and taking on that role, right? So it is something
Correct.
that you have to choose to do, not be forced into in a spot like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that if you are forced into it, then you need to have the self-awareness to say, okay, what skill sets am I lacking? Right? As opposed to being forced into it and maintaining that individualistic mindset. And then all of a sudden you start blaming everything externally, right? And that's why, like Jocko Willink, who's obviously from the military side, but he says all the time, there's no bad teams, just bad leaders, right? And a lot of times that's where that mindset shows up, is they're still holding on to that individualist piece of them, that ultimately has to die is a strong word, but it has to take a back seat to the greater good, right? And I struggle with this as an entrepreneur. Like, I'm a highly, highly competitive person. I want to win 100 to nothing all the time, right? But I have a team of people around me. It's not about me. If I allow my ego to rule those decisions, then all of a sudden I'm not showing up as the best version of myself for them. And now I can't allow them to flourish. My job now is to hand them the ball and get out of the way. And that's very different, right? And so it's hard to shift that mindset.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times what you almost need to be doing is just removing yourself from the situation, right? You almost have to remove yourself and kind of see it from like a third party perspective, and see what is your best value, right? Where do you come in the best? How can you serve in your role the best for everybody else, instead of thinking, all right, I'm a part of this, and how do I need to satisfy my own needs or my own desires? Almost seeing it from
Yeah,
an outside perspective.
it's finding your 5%, Like, to me, leaders, you're put in a role because you're exceptional at something in that 5%, right? And the reason I say 5%, it may be an exaggeration, but if you think about it, like 85% of what you do on a daily basis could be done by somebody who was highly trained, right? 10% could be done by somebody who was directly mentored by you, right? So maybe they need that extra little touch. The remaining 5%, that's what makes you special. That's the thing. Like, that's your it factor as a leader. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, how do I create an environment where my team is sufficient enough that I can operate in my 5%, that I don't have to do anything that falls in that other 95%, right? Or as little as possible. Obviously, it's not, in a utopian world, you'd be able to just operate in that 5%. But the reality is there's going to have to be times where you have to step out of your lane and catch some foul balls for people. And that's fine. But if you're spending too much time outside of that 5%, you're not there doing what you were supposed to be doing.
Right, absolutely. And I think this brings up that brings up a pretty good point as well, which is I think a lot of people will see, being a leader as meaning different things for them, right? And that's I think what you were talking about with what your specific 5% is. And there's different leadership styles that are out there. So I guess my question to you is, what would you say, to people out there who think there's only one type of leader, or if they're not a certain type of personality, they don't think they can become a leader? Would you say there's different styles out there? You just got to kind of find your own and fit yourself into that role?
Yeah, it's an absolute spectrum, man. It's an absolute spectrum. You will fall somewhere on the spectrum. And I would argue that you don't want to be like other people's leadership styles. You want your own, right? It should be you, because in fitness and in strength and conditioning, we always had a saying, when coaches would try and copy somebody else's programming, right? So somebody else's training program, you could ask, what's the best training program? The one that you can coach, right? And so I learned early on in my career, and I was fortunate, something I really stuck to was I always told people, it's not what I do that makes me special. I'll give anybody in the country my training program. That's not why we win games. It's the way that we do it, right? It's my personal touch. It's the environment that we've created in here, as a reflection of, right? Your business is the same thing. And so when we talk leadership styles, yes, there's absolutely leadership personas, right? But I think of it more of being like a DJ, being in front of a mixer table with a bunch of different character traits and personality traits, and knowing which ones to turn up and which ones to turn down, that are the right mix for you in the environment, in the context, with the people that you're dealing with, right? And so the way that I lead my team internally is different than the way I lead my clients. And the way that I show up in my internal meetings with my VP or my director of corporate training is very different than the way that I show up with our VA or our CPA, right? And so when it comes to leadership styles, it really comes down to your mix of what I call the 5 C's, right? So the 5 C's are character, consistency, commitment, creativity, and communication. How your 5 C's show up for you is what's going to define the way that you lead, right? And so in a sports standpoint, it's easy to kind of to use this as an example. If you look at it, there's leaders on the team that are heat seekers, right? So you're thinking Michael Jordan, Kobe, like guys that are not afraid to get in your grill and let you know, hey, this is what we need to do. I'm going to have the hard conversations. I'm going to compete. I want the ball in my hands in the final seconds. That's your heat seeker. Those people are great. You need them. If you have too many, it can get really hairy really quick, right? So you have your heat seekers. Then you have your thermostats. And everybody knows like the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat, right? The thermometer tells you the temperature, the thermostat sets it. So you have your thermostats within the team, which are people that are not affected by outside pressure. They show up on a daily basis. They do what they're supposed to do, and they don't get swayed by anything. They're going to come in and they're going to set the temperature of your team, right? They may not want that big shot at the end of the game. That's fine, but they're still going to set the temperature, right? And then you have people that are the guardians of the standard. These are people that notice the details. These are detail-oriented people. You need them on your team. They lead from that way. They push your culture forward, right? They're really important. And then you have people on a sports team that are extensions of the coaching staff. These are people that have a really high tactical or strategic IQ, and they can relay that message to the employees or to the rest of the team. So right there's 4 examples, right? And there's more, but that's just 4 easy ones. And so when people say, what's your leadership style? I say it depends who I'm leading. But it's all a reflection of me as a person and my vision, my mission, my values, my set of experiences, and how my 5 C's show up for me.
Absolutely. And I love that the 4 examples that you gave, right? These are 4 very different types of personalities, but without any one of them, right, the organization doesn't work the way that it's supposed to work. And everybody plays their own leadership role, if you want to think about it that way. And it's almost like 4 different types of leaders coming in as like one super leader working together for the team to actually
Correct.
flourish.
Correct. Absolutely. But it requires that self-awareness, right? And that's why like there are the different leadership styles. So if you think about, again, just a silly example that we use a lot is like the Avengers. They know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and they're able to say, "Hey, today's Hulk's day. Today's Captain America's day. Today's, you know what I mean? Today is whoever's day." But if you don't have the self-awareness to be able to say, "Hey, I'm willing to one, know my strengths, know my weaknesses, know my team's strengths and weaknesses, but I'm also so committed to our vision and our organization that I'm willing to step back and say, today's not my day. It's not my turn to take the spotlight right now." Right? That's a really difficult thing to do. That's the type of leader that you're looking for. And that's when you have those four, again, there's more than that, but if you have those multiple types of leaders working together and they're able to do that team style leadership where we can lead peer to peer, then you have a really powerful group. But that takes a lot of emotional maturity, takes a lot of emotional intelligence, takes a lot of self awareness, it takes a lot of empathy. It takes a lot of things and vulnerability. A lot of words that are buzzwords in pseudoscience, and they're simple, but they're not easy, right?
Right, absolutely. There's so many things, right? Especially when it comes to leadership that are they're simple in concept or simple in fundamentals and principle, but they're not easy. They're never easy, right? Like you said, it is a 24/7 kind of job being a leader. And I think the next evolution of, becoming a great leader is developing leaders within your team, right? You can know yourself, you can lead your team successfully, but being able to develop new leaders within your team after you've kind of gotten the hold of what your leadership style is and what you can do, I think that's the next step. So how would you say what's the best way to approach that, right? What's the best way to kind of go ahead and identify, but also develop the leaders that are in your organization that could potentially take your place or fill your gaps?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is to recognize that at all times you should be in a mentor mentee relationship and a mentee mentor relationship, right? So I always like to surround myself where I have a mentor that's a couple steps ahead of me that I'm chasing and I'm learning from, and then also a mentee that wants to be better than me and that I want to be better than me, right? And so I think that's the first step, is to understand that you still need to be in both of those roles. I think sometimes when we get into leadership positions, we stop being mentored ourselves, and all of a sudden we just focus on pouring into everybody else, right? Well, now we're not getting any better. Okay, so we still have to be in both of those roles, or we're afraid to mentor below because we feel like we don't know enough yet. Everybody has something to bring to the table, so you should be in both of those roles at most times, right? The second piece is identifying who's willing to make that choice to become the leader, right? And then figuring out amongst your, again, those 5 C's that we talked about, where do they shine? What's their 5%? And then how do we build upon that? And then how do we start to bring the other tools along, right? And so when I look at it, developing leaders is all about systems. It's all about having systems and being able to say, okay, this is repeatable over time, right? So if we have opportunities to put people in leadership roles, so it could be having them run things like before action reviews or after action reviews during projects, like have them get up there and brainstorm this in a low stakes environment and run through it, right? The worst thing that we can do is just shove someone in the deep end and say, figure it out, right? And so, but sometimes we do that and we're like, oh no, we're developing leaders. No, you're developing deficiencies. You're showing this person every area that they're deficient. You're not showing them how to use their strengths, right, to figure things out. So instead, you want to build a system where you're exposing people to leadership opportunities and finding what their 5% is, because it's going to be different than yours, right? It might look different, it might show up differently. So I think that's the first step. And then the second step, sorry. And I think the third thing is just consistency over time. Like leadership, again, our company motto is built, not born. It is something that takes time. It is not a 1 day thing. It is not a 3 day thing. It's not a 5 day thing. it is something that you have to consistently do and be able to reevaluate and re-engage in the process. So there has to be that consistent feedback. And I think that's where the culture piece comes in. If you build a culture that supports vulnerability and the willingness to take risks and the willingness to own up to mistakes, the willingness to ask questions and set boundaries and take on new initiatives and innovate, right now you're creating a environment where leadership thrives, and you're creating an environment where a lot of people feel like, hey, I can step into this, I can step into the gap and become a leader. And then from there you get more specific in what type of experiences you want to give them, right, and what type of mentorship, what type of training you want to expose them to, et cetera, to bring up some of those other leadership skills so that they're comfortable playing multiple leadership personas. Because early on, everybody has that one leadership persona that works for them, right? It could be the drill sergeant where you come out and you're just like, this is the way things are. And you have no empathy and no relationship. And you're just like, I am the sales manager and this is the way we're going to do things, right? Or you have those leaders that come in and I joke about it and call it the cool uncle, right? They're the one that slip you a beer at Thanksgiving when you're not supposed to be drinking, right? They come in and they want to be buddy buddy with their staff. And they're like, oh, I'm a new leader. I want everyone to like me, right? This, that, and the other. That's your first leadership persona. Then you have people that are the superstar. They're the people that come in and they're like, hey, just follow me, just do what I do. And then all of a sudden they set out on this unbelievable pace that the people below them are not ready to sustain. And so what does that do? It makes your people feel overwhelmed. It makes them feel like they can't do it, right? Versus if you're that quote unquote cool uncle, it basically creates an environment of anarchy because there's no feedback, there's no restrictions, there's no guardrails, there's no nothing. Ultimately, it's about relationships. Then you have people that come in like the tour guide and they say, hey, I have the map to where we need to go. Follow me and I'll show you along the way. Right. So you have to figure out what persona is you're comfortable, what's your comfort zone, where are you going to go to first? Because that's what you're going to go to in times of stress. That persona is going to be what comes out, right? You have to figure that out, and then you have to figure out what's missing that I can't utilize the other personas. Because great leaders are able to jump between them depending on the situation and the environment, right? So it's a long process, and it takes a lot of self discovery. It takes a lot of different situations and environments and experiences to teach people, to start to build that leadership self efficacy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you painted the picture of the different types of leadership personas, right? And I see it all the time with people. Some people are just, they're the absolute drill sergeant, right? They'll say something and it's their way or the highway. And then there's the complete opposite of the spectrum, which is, like you said, the cool uncle who just comes in and they just want to be liked by everybody, and nothing's actually happening in their team as well. So I think something else that I see a lot of just new leaders or even experienced leaders struggle with as far as developing leaders or even just developing talent is kind of finding that balance between doing something for their team versus being hands off and letting them experience that. And I think that's, what would you say to that as far as finding the balance there, right? Because there's always people that are not doing enough, but there's always the other side of that, which is people that are literally trying to do everything for their team and set them up and baby them like they're a toddler.
Yeah, there's that matrix out there, which is like challenge versus empower, right? And
Mm.
and I think you have to figure out what works best for your people. And so one of the things that we hear a lot when we come into an organization is senior managers, middle managers, whoever will tell us, well, this is my leadership style. And my response is always the same. That's great. I'm glad you're having that experience. That's irrelevant. Doesn't matter. If your people can't be led that way, then you're not leading anybody. You're just a guy out for a walk. Right. And so what we need to do is we start to identify, okay, how do my people respond best? Do they like to be challenged? Meaning, do they like for me to give them directives and just get out of the way and let them go? Or do they like to be empowered, where I give them directives followed by clarity, followed by check ins, right? Where I'm engaging and I'm monitoring. Like, you have to figure out where on the spectrum your team falls. I know I have people within my organization. I have one person that comes to mind that's on my senior leadership team that I look at him, I just give him a direction and get out of the way. And I know that he's going to get there. It might not be the way I would have got there, but he's going to get there and it's going to be good. It may even be more efficient and effective than the way I would have done it. So he thrives in that. Go for it. You're a self starter, right? I have another person on my team that prefers more clarity and more guardrails. And so when I'm giving them a project, I use, what I call the 10X rule, which is if it's important to me, then it better be repeated 10 times in 10 different ways to make sure that it's clear. Right. And so that person thrives under that. So it's a little bit different. You have to figure out what works. I don't think that there's a right answer. I think it depends.
That's actually, probably the best answer I've heard, if anywhere, just because that's the right way to, I think that's the quote unquote right way to do it, because everybody, like, it's one thing to think of yourself as an individual and what your leadership style is, but you got to think about the people that you're leading and what's the best way that they can respond, or what's the most effective way for them to be led, right? It's always, thinking about, you were talking about education earlier. It's always, teachers will say, my students are not learning. Well, it's not that they're not learning, it's that you're not taking the extra effort to figure out how to teach it in a way that's important to them. So I think that's actually a really great answer, figuring out what's the best way for your people to be led and then fitting yourself into that role.
Yeah, one of the great examples of this, and it's a little off the beaten path, but I loved it. Was I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary, The Defiant Ones, about Dr. Dre, Jimmy Iovine, some of the real legends in the hip hop field and through music. But one of the things that they highlight in there is when Dre was making beats, right? When he was making the headphones, he had them test them in a car, and then he wanted to test them in the car. He wanted to test them in an airplane. He wanted to go and sit on the wing where the engines are. Why? Because he wanted the message to be heard a certain way. Right? He wanted to make sure that no matter where they were sitting, the audience was getting the message in the way that it was intended. And I think great leaders are like that. They put themselves in the audience's shoes, and they know, like a DJ, which knobs to turn up, which knobs to turn down. It needs a little bit more bass. It needs a little bit less, a little more treble. This person's in this area of the arena. I have to turn the volume up a little bit so that they hear me. Like that to me is what communication and leadership is about. It's about knowing your people, KYP, right? It's one of the earliest things you learn in football is know your personnel. Right? And that's what you need to do as a leader. You have to be able to do that in order to effectively communicate the vision, the mission, the values, and the individual strategies that you're trying to implement.
Absolutely. Knowing your people, and would you say like the best way to do that is just by being open, right? Asking questions, knowing that you don't know everything and you have to let people tell you sometimes what's the best way for them.
Absolutely. Great leaders are great listeners. Like the best listeners or the best leaders are the great observers as well. Like I think if you're a leader and you're not investing in better communication skills, meaning empathetic listening, um, better conversation skills, meaning the way that you ask questions, and learning to do almost the improv style of yes and, right? You never say no to anything, and not saying no to initiatives, but when you're in general conversation, right? Yes and then asking those open-ended questions, being a student of some sort of body language. You don't have to learn it all, but learning those things, I think is so vital for a leader. You have to be able to listen and ask questions, because here's the thing: people will tell you everything you want to know. People love talking about themselves. So if you want to get to know your people, ask questions and then be genuinely interested in the answer. Listen to understand. Don't listen to respond. Right? Because here's the thing: when you are trying to persuade someone, most of the time, what it comes down to is that people are not interested in what you want. They are interested in why it's good for them. And if you haven't listened to them, you don't know what their value system is. You don't know what motivates them. You don't know how they respond to certain communication styles. You don't know if they're intrinsically or extrinsically motivated. You have no idea. How am I supposed to persuade someone with no background? I can't. Right. So instead, if I spend the time doing that groundwork and figuring out all these things and then building that level of trust and rapport with them, now I can go to them and I can hit those emotional triggers. I can appeal to their logic. I can appeal to their reason. I can appeal to their motivations. I can appeal to all of these things. And all of a sudden, those hard things that you're asking somebody to do, maybe giving up a weekend with their kid watching a soccer game to come in and work on a project, right? Or go the extra mile for a customer who's a pain in the butt, all of a sudden those things seem like good ideas because you painted the picture the right way. You can't do that if you don't have the background information, if you don't study communication and learn how to motivate and how to persuade people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love it, man. Well, It's great having you on the show, David. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your value and knowledge with everybody today. I think I personally learned a lot when it comes to leadership and leadership development as well. And I think everybody who's listening to this can take a lot away as well. So, for anybody who is listening to this right now or watching this that want to know more about what you do and want to know more, follow you, follow your journey, maybe get a little bit inside track into kind of what you're doing with, your consulting. What are some of the best ways for people to find you on social media or just to follow you?
Yeah, the simplest way, man, is edgeleadershipacademy.com. That's our website that has all of our information. There's also a newsletter link on there if you want to get a little something every Friday in your inbox. We call it the Finish Friday newsletter, just something to jack you up, keep you going through that finish line. We also are active on all social medias. You can follow me directly at Coach D Kitch. If you interact with our social medias, that is me. I run my own. I run my own Instagram, run my own LinkedIn. So if you're trying to get directly to me, that's the best way to do that. We do have our mentorship program will be opening up again here in a few weeks. So that's called the table. We call that because everybody wants a seat at it. Everybody wants to bring something to it, right? So our group is called the table. We only take 15 people at a time, but I do have one-on-one coaching slots available as well right now. And then anything organizationally you can find on our website. So if you're looking to bring us in for a workshop or a keynote or anything like that, that information is all on the website. So all those things are out there. At the end of the day, our job and our mission is to just be the driving force behind people's success, whether that's in business, in athletics, or just in life. So that's what we're here to do. So I'm happy to connect with anybody out there that's looking for that extra bump. We also have our podcast that drops every Wednesday, the Built Not Born podcast, where we sit down with industry leaders and talk about the journey and how they got to where they are. And obviously I do some solo episodes from time to time and get on my soapbox and give some unsolicited TED Talks. So that's always fun for me.
That's awesome, man. We'll make sure to leave all of that and the links to those in the description down below. Make sure to go check out David's show and his social media profiles as well. But Dave, thanks again for being on the show. Really appreciate you being here. Before we let you sign off, any last pieces of advice, any last tips you want to leave with us here?
Yeah, I think the number one tip that I always leave in leadership is just be who you needed. Don't get lost in the minutia. Don't get lost in all the concepts and the theories and the constructs. Ultimately, leadership comes down to the people business, right? So be who you needed. Be the father, be the son, be the brother, sister, mother, mentor, employee, employer, manager, whatever. Just be who you needed. And if you do that, you'll be off to the races, man. And the sky's the limit from there.
That's awesome. Really love that advice. Thanks again for being on the show. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on the next show. Take care.
Thanks.